Thank you, Ambassador Giseri. Good morning, actually good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Hanif Al-Qasim, Ambassador Delmi, Ambassador Wahab, fellow panelists, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to participate in this panel discussion on behalf of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I work in the anti-racial discrimination section at the office, and as part of our mandate, we're charged to deal with issues of religious intolerance worldwide. And of course, the issues that we're discussing today with respect to Muslims in Europe is also part of our portfolio and the topics that we deal with. As we've heard from various speakers this morning, the age-old scourges of religious intolerance and discrimination on the basis of religion and belief are still alive and well in our technologically advanced modern societies today. There are countless stories of religious intolerance and violence and negative stereotyping. All you have to do is turn on the television, listen to the radio, and you're bombarded by these examples. Unfortunately, even in our office, we do receive news from various different sources that verbal and physical attacks and hate crime statistics are all on the rise, often by several 100% in many different regions of the world. And issues of racial profiling are also alive and well on the streets and public places and workplaces all over the world. The international community, as has been also noted by Ambassador Wahab, is obviously very cognizant of these issues. It's not new on the table, and has taken very strong note of the rising intolerance and violence and discrimination on several grounds that's been plaguing the world, including obviously on the basis of race, ethnicity, and racial and religious intolerance. In recent years, the United Nations system has taken a greater look and is paying greater attention to issues of religious intolerance and violence on the basis of religion and belief. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail later. And member states have been called upon in terms of the international system to take actions to combat racial and religious intolerance. In this sense, this side event today is very timely, and it's very welcome. We're grateful that the Geneva Center for Human Rights Advancement and Global Dialogue has convened this important discussion and is a way to continue a constructive dialogue to look at practical actions in how to deal with the issues of religious intolerance worldwide. I think it's important to put on the table very clearly from the point of view of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in the United Nations system, while this event does focus on issues of Muslims in Europe and the issues of religious intolerance where Muslim individuals and groups are concerned, there is obviously an overall increase in religious intolerance in many parts of the world. It's not confined to Europe. It is a worldwide phenomenon, unfortunately, and it is perpetrated against people of different faiths and religions and confessions and beliefs in virtually every corner of the planet. And I think it's important to say that. Unfortunately, the road to harmony is strewn in many countries with all kinds of roadblocks against many different groups in order to put that clearly on the table. I think that it is an issue that no region is immune to, and it's important to discuss this in this context. So just harkening back to what I said earlier, over the years, several resolutions and several actions of the United Nations and several mechanisms of the Human Rights Council have noted that intolerance, including Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, Christianophobia, are on the increase, fueling distrust, mistrust, suspicion, discrimination, and even violence and hate crimes perpetrated against members of religious groups. And of course, there are dimensions within these dimensions. What we find in our office is that religious intolerance also has many faces in the sense that it is often interfused and integrated with other grounds of discrimination, such as gender. Women all too often suffer from discrimination on the grounds of both gender and religion or belief. And in some countries, laws continue to discriminate against women, such as legislation that prohibits the donning of the veil in public places. Migrants are also facing discrimination on the basis of their status as well as on other grounds, sometimes as it relates to religion and belief or perceived religion and belief. And xenophobia is often triggered and stoked with, unfortunately, issues of religion and belief in various parts of the world. And people are discriminated against or feared as outsiders, often because of their origin, their customs, or their faith. I think it's not new to anyone that public discourse also seems to be playing a significant role in fostering xenophobia and exacerbating xenophobic sentiment against Muslims, against people of other religious groups. This negative stereotyping by the media and by extremist political parties or even mainstream political parties, often coupled with advocacy of religious hatred, seems to be an alarming trend around the globe. Just very recently, on the 5th of September at The Hague, at a meeting of the Peace, Justice and Security Foundation Gala, our High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zayed Rad Al Hussein, warned of the half-truths, manipulations, and the peddling of fear by populists and demagogues all around the world. So all of these phenomena, quite frankly, tear at the fabric of societies. They create mistrust, political and social instability, and they clearly pose a threat to peace. Now, it's not new. There is already, as it exists, an international framework that gives international legislative guidance to member states to deal with issues of freedom of religion and belief. And I'm not going to go through all of the articles, obviously, but starting from the Universal Declaration on Human Rights to the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, there are already international standards for member states established in regards to freedom of religion and belief, freedom of thought conscious, and also the freedom of worship. It's important to remember that in addressing all of these issues, there's always the obligation of the state to protect the victims. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of states. And in discussing issues of discrimination on the basis of religion and belief and how to prevent these violations that occur, it's important that at the national level, the member states implement the international standards which regard to the protection and freedom of religion and belief. I think that Ambassador Wahab has already set out a little bit Resolution 1618, which for our office and the international community is seen as a step forward in terms of dealing with some of these issues. It's of course not the cure for all that ails you, and it does give some practical guidance to member states in dealing with issues of freedom of religion and belief in a number of areas, including awareness raising and education, legislative measures, administration and policy measures. For our part, at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we're responsible for drafting the implementation reports that are submitted on behalf of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to the Human Rights Council, as well as for the Secretary General to the General Assembly every year on the very long-term reports on combating intolerance, negative stereotyping, stigmatization, discrimination, incitement to violence, and violence against persons on the basis of religion and belief. While the resolution doesn't speak obviously very explicitly about issues of harmony or use the word harmony, I think it could be argued that it's certainly fair that where there's no violence or incitement to violence, you have more harmonious societies. Where there's no stereotyping or stigmatization, there's harmony, and obviously where there's no discrimination, there's harmony and more stable societies. The general trends that we've been able to pick up from writing this report over the several years, and I'll just very quickly mention them for you, is that the states that report to us tell us that they are taking comprehensive measures to implement at the constitutional and legislative level protections for their domestic populations in terms of freedom of religion and belief. The actions taken by states are primarily policy oriented, and they also involve criminal codes, civil laws, and also there is quite a lot of frameworks in terms of incitement to national, religious, and racial hatred. All of the reporting states tell us that at various times, and these are under the action plan that's in the 1618 resolution, speak out at the level of government officials, at the level of religious leaders against hate speech and intolerance. There is a lot of interfaith and intercultural dialogue taking place around the world, which is also called for in the resolution. There are a number of communication bodies and forums which take place at the national and local and municipal levels, dealing with issues of security and policing. And there's also the issue of hate crimes, which is becoming more and more to the fore in terms of our reporting, where a number of member states tell us that they're taking domestic measures to gather information, victim outreach, and strengthening their legal prosecution in these areas. Maybe later, if we have time, I'll talk about what the office, in addition to the reporting, is doing in the area of religious intolerance.